And we are live. Hello, PJ.
How are you, man?
I'm doing great, and I'm happy to have you around.
I know. Thank you first off for having me on. It's an honor, and I'm excited we got to meet at camp, and here we are. So yeah, we're pumped.
Yeah, that fireside chat was great. Um, for those who don't know, like I met PJ at Camp Mograph, and I saw him around at camp, but we didn't got a chance to talk. And then the fireside chat with Brandon Pravini happened. And usually fireside chats last like an hour 30, and this one lasted until 2 a.m. Um, and it was great because it allowed me to meet PJ and Brandon and other people around, but also on a different level than the usual. Hi, I'm this person and I do this. So, could you share with us who is PJ?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is PJ Richardson, co-founder of Laundry. I'll leave that official title stuff at that. Deep down, I'm an artist that wants to continue to push and create beautiful things that delight people, but that really I think as part of that passion also struggles with how to do that, how to make great things, how to stay relevant, excited, crafted, and I think I'm like any other artist. I want to I love the craft, but it also comes with the uncertainties and insecurities and confusions and mental garble that I think a lot of us artists have to make the things we do and create with the teams that we do.
Okay, and besides the work, let's say besides the craft,
Yeah.
how would you define yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would define myself as just a person that likes to treat people like I'd like to be treated, which is mainly kindness and enthusiasm and curiosity. Um, I think that's who at its core. I think that's the fundamentals of everything I do and am and be, and whether it's in life or creativity.
Okay. Um, so I have a topic to discuss with you today. And the way I work is I come across things or that like induce feelings and thoughts on me. And then I generally like connect those to people. And I choose those like so I chose specifically this topic for you for two reasons. One because something you said at Camp Mograph, and it lasted all a second, but it stayed in me, uh, in a corner of my mind. I don't remember exactly what we were talking, but you said, "Yeah, I've already been down that path of like ego and like burning down and stuff like that." And then it went away, and we changed topics. But that, like I said, stayed in the corner to my mind. And then I saw that you guys did some projects for the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is like a pretty daunting undertaking, I would say. It's a new format, it's a new way of working, but also like let's say, you don't get that job easily, and the technical and artistic, and also like client demands are very specific, I think,
Yeah.
and you have to reach a certain level to get there. And so the topic is the pursuit of excellence, but also this to me is like a trifecta. It's like the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's the good, but then there's the ugly. So what are the costs and sacrifices um, to reach it? So
Yeah.
so let's start with the good. Let's start positive. Um, so how do you like? Let's start with the beginning. Let's say when do you got like when were you awakened to that sense of like that quest of excellence?
Oh, that's a loaded question because there's several layers to it. But what I would say is immediately from the start of my career about 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I saw same as everybody else. You see some amazing motion graphics piece, and you're like, I want to do that. That's cool. That makes me feel cool. I want that satisfaction. I want that, the accolades or the success on the internet or whatever it is that drives you, and you just viscerally have a reaction to it just because it's something awesome. In my case, it was film titles for like Seven and stuff by like MK12 back in the day, right? But that feeling continues to this day of new great work that makes me get out of bed and makes me want to do something not like that. I don't want to copy people, but it makes me want to make great stuff through the inspiration I see from other work out there, right? And so um that is one part of what drives excellence for me, but it's a little bit, and then the other part is and lately I've been a lot more, that's sort of outward, that's sort of almost like you're comparing yourself to others or you're seeing other work and being like, I want to do that, right? And that works to a certain degree, but it's a very, especially in the age of social media, it's very dangerous because then you start to like compare yourself to others and measure your success against others, right? Lately though, with my buddy Josh Pierce is really into he does these incredible 3D artists, and he combines it with meditation and his passion for meditation, and him and I have these really wonderful conversations, and it has pushed me lately to find excellence in my work by going inwards versus outwards. And that also, to your point about the good, that's been really inspiring for me to find the good side of excellence purely by going inwards through experimentation, through getting off the computer and this kind of a thing. So that's one part of it for sure. I
Okay.
think
Go ahead. Sorry.
no, go for it. Tell me what you think.
No, I was gonna say like, um, to me started similar as you, but I would say that what digging inside of me, like you're saying, I just realized that my father has always been a perfectionist and a workaholic.
Yep.
Uh, and so there's always been this quest of like uh, being as good as you can in what you do, whatever you do, because
Yep.
it's not only work. It's like uh, he teach me also to do woodworking, and even when doing woodworking, it had to be perfect. And so I trace back that thing to that relationship with my father, um, which I didn't realize at first, because then you become a teenager, and then you get into fights with your parents, and you deny all of that, and you think you understood the world, and but that stuff is like in there. It's the monster sleeping inside of you that then wakes up, and yeah. So on my end, I can trace that also back to that moment.
Okay, so if we want to go that deep with it and that far back, I'll go in on this with you because it's much more than what I just said in a way. That's like a later step of it, right? But so um, I'll get vulnerable here. My growing up, my childhood, I lived with a single mom who was bipolar, alcoholic, abusive boyfriend. We all lived in an apartment. It was pretty horrible for me mental health wise, and I escaped through graffiti and then ultimately graphic design. I went to art school, and I kind of fell in love with electronic music and hip hop, and found this sort of cross section of my graphic design major and music via motion graphics. And a humongous part of me, because you made me think of it with what you just described, was, and this is something that stuck with me even now, is I fell in love with motion graphics as a way to sort of create validation or excellence or satisfaction that I was doing something I love, both to escape and to create something that felt like it validated me as a person and or mattered. Now, the danger of that, because hey, look, that's a way better, healthier outlet than I don't know, doing drugs or something, right? But then the really dangerous side of it is you keep that fire in your heart from troublesome past, and quickly that can become an escape and overwork and workaholism and all that stuff, which I've easily gone down the path and still kind of do. But I think I talk about this in talks a lot, and I don't mean this to get to a much more topical level because it really matters to the intimacy of this point. Is that a humongous part of me uses motion design to create joy for myself and for others that sometimes I hadn't gotten previously, and that's okay. Which is
Thank
why
you.
I work colorful and happy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, but thank you for sharing that. And like I told you when I reached you with this call, uh, that's that's what I want us to get to. It's like into these deep conversations because I think people outside only see the success,
Yep.
only see the excellence. But sometimes that excellence and that success come from a place that can be very painful.
Yeah.
Because that pain is like it's like an engine. It's like the fuel. I always say like I always had some harsh moments in my life, and my escape was also through the discovery of video games, um, music, and art.
Yeah.
Um, and so I always say like, this is a mix of passion but also of anger. Like it's
Yeah.
like this feeling of anger of like injustice of or stuff that should have been differently, and that keeps you like going. Like you don't accept them to let it go. Um, so and like you mentioned a couple times now, like the need of validation. So I suspect that was, I don't know now because that's not how I felt when I met you, but maybe in the past that was something you chased in this like notion of excellence.
Yeah, not very much so. And I think when we went from I can't speak for my business partner for my team, but I am responsible as a leader for my team with what I am, who I am, and decisions I make because of that. But for a very long time, we made decisions and pursued work and made work purely on validation and did good. I mean, we didn't go out of business, luckily, but when we switched it from that to pursuing excellence and collaboration, truly, like not just saying it as a buzzword, but like really creating partnerships with our clients, we and just and I know this sounds so stereotypical, but we when we really doubled down on the process of it, not the result, the work went the quality of the work and success skyrocketed. And not always, but generally for the most part. And I think that's because again we went inward. We went to and one thing that we did that I think if we get into the like the trauma side of things and the validation side of things, right? Like I think a lot of the time the risk is that you do these things as a way to escape difficult paths forward that you have to go through, whether emotionally or quite literally, right? And but what happens with that in relationship to the excellence of creativity is that it can get really safe. You look for safety even creatively sometimes, and but but and it's a dangerous game with advertising because safety often means consistency, which also means client work, right? But when we started to like face challenges head on and run through things, whether technically or creatively, even the hardest of things, that's where things got really excellent. It's sort of like slamming two rocks to make the diamond kind of a thing. And that's ultimately how I think the sphere work happened, was because it was a cross section of us being a bigger enough studio that could be trusted with such an undertaking. My business partner really took that on in its earlier stages and really figured out the technical workflow in an incredibly difficult way. And we just drove right down the middle of this into the storm to figure out how to work on something like that. And when I've done that personally, or when we've done that as a studio, yes, it's scary, it's messy, it's stressful, but that's when um, generally excellent things happen. There's failures. Don't get me wrong. We don't do it on purpose, but sometimes it does not go good because we're trying to do things that that aren't safe. And then there's a whole other layer of like the imposter syndrome side of that, of feeling like we suck and we can't and we don't and uncertain, which happens a lot. But I think that's in direct partnership to us challenging ourselves and pushing through very, very difficult things to find, much more excellent results, depending on what that means to different people.
Um, like the thing you were saying about validation, like to me strikes a nerve because um, when I was younger, I went through a phase where I suffered a lot from bullying,
Hmm.
and so when surrounded by people that like tell you for years that you aren't worth anything, and nowadays we live in a society which doesn't value a lot of people either. Like you're kind of like disposable. Um, that nurtured like in me like that need of validation for a while, um, until the moment it's not sustainable anymore. Like you said, and I had to like fill myself with something else to keep going. Um, but let's not like, get like too much into that because that's not the topic of the conversation. Um, I'm interested in the part you mentioned, like when you started like thinking about the process, and focusing more on that than the, let's say again, this outside thing, the persona or the character. Um, could you share a little bit more how that went in with the Sphere project? Um,
Yeah, I can. I, you know, so what I can say about that is let me just first off lead off because I have to because it's the truth. We don't come up with this stuff by ourselves. We work as creators for the Sphere team and their vision and everything. But the thing that and that's where the partnership really is. Like they have the vision and we help them bring it to life and in the best cases bring some new twists to it when time, money, or just the way of life unfolds, right? But what they so when they started that project, we worked on it about 18 months before it launched, which was like a year and a half ago or so. And they had none of us knew that it was going to become what would become. We're like, oh yeah, Sphere. Um, they knew that it was an advertising screen, and they were like, hey, look, we want to create content workflows or like I wouldn't say templates, but we want to create creative buckets for several different types of things, from travel to product to entertainment and so forth. Now, what became really and that part's kind of easy because you're like, yeah, you put an airplane, you put a bottle of beer in there, whatever. But what my business partner and our technical team ran into very quickly was how to get that how to create content in animation that would go on there, because live action didn't work because it was spherical and would stretch. You couldn't put a traditional advertisement on there in a sense. um, there was humongous challenges with like even how to create a file or a template file that would work. So like you have this giant ball, and one way is you can do 360-degree art over the outside of it, almost like a wrapping paper or a pattern. Fine, no problem. Or you do three scenes, two or three, four scenes that repeat like a traditional uh, uh, animation or motion graphics piece, and you it's almost like you're watching it from three or four windows. And so we had to create a pipeline for that, and then figure out how to get it to naturally transition from one part to the other. Really long way of saying it just took a lot of experimentation to figure out how to get that to work. But more importantly, and this is the part that we ran into and the clients ran into tons of walls on, how to create content that would work for the user experience of being in Las Vegas driving around and looking at this thing, right? Because you're either looking at it from a hotel, the Ferris wheel, or very likely in a taxi cab or a car. You're looking at it for 3 seconds. You need to, and we everybody still struggles with this. Because our creative minds want to go crazy and do these complex narrative things, but it's ultimately a giant art piece or logo that at any given time you want someone to take a snap of at any point in that 90-second block and make sure they A, get the same thing over and over, or B, know what they're looking at and who's paying for it. And it's just a typical billboard branding problem, right? And so it took a long time for everybody, for all of us, to get comfortable to create for that. And that often means going a lot simpler than more complex. Like, to this day, the most popular piece on there is still that emoji, and it's yellow, has a little vector face, and no matter when you look at it in that 90-second block, which is what the runtime is on the Sphere, you know what it is. And so that's always the big challenge. And it just took a lot of experimentation, a lot of broken eggs, a lot of client notes to get there. So at a technical level, one of the things we also figured out is the Sphere, at least on the outside. If you've ever worked in VR, when you're in VR, you have a camera, spherical camera, and you're looking at 360 degrees around the spherical camera. Sphere is the exact same thing. It's just that the camera's on the outside instead of the inside. It's a spherical piece, and that's ultimately it. So yeah.
You know that what you mentioned about like simplification, um, I just finished working on a couple of pieces for concert visuals, and kind of like the same problematic happens. It's like there's already so much things happening. So you have the band playing, and then you have like the lights and the smoke and the pyrotechnics. So that's already like a lot. And then you're doing all these visuals, and you start crafting these complex and with a lot of details, and then already you realize the resolution of those LED panels and everything, a lot of it is going to be lost. And and then it's like, yeah, okay, well then let's do all with all these videos and everything. And I was like, I mean, are people going to really watch that? Like people should be focused on something else. And so you end up with like you kind of like what you say with the emojis, like simple vector stuff, patterns synced with music and everything. Sometimes you have more complex elements, but it's very select, like it's not like all the time, because otherwise you cannot focus on what's important.
Yeah, and it's a question for you. I want to see what you think about this, but I think so much of this comes back to, well, it's hard to get to, but it's really about empathy and about putting ourselves in the shoes of the user experience, whether it's a client or, in this case, what we were talking about was concert graphics or even the Sphere. Like it, and to your point, what really, I mean, what do you think about that? Because what you said to me, I think really struck, where you're like, hey, we're making these complex, cool graphics and animations, but then there's concert lights, there's music, there's all these different things. And I don't know, how does that, because I think we get so myopic in what we create sometimes.
Well, I think that applies not only to these specific scenarios, which are the Sphere or concert visuals. I think they apply to art in general. Like this is a conversation I often have with like juniors, is they are trying to be smart. And there's this artist, I will his name will come back to me in a while. He's a guitarist, and he's played with like Daft Punk and like a lot of musicians. And he said something that like really struck a chord on me. He mentioned that when he was younger, he was hired to play with a very famous group, and they were going to play music from the top 40 tracks at the time. And then they mentioned, oh, you will have to play this track. And he goes like, oh, come on, like not this track. It's like, and the producer went like, why not? It's so simple. Like it's so dumb. You're like, I don't like it. It's too simple. And he says like, well, it's in the top 40, so it is a good track. And he goes like, how do you like? What do you mean? It's not a good track. It's like very rudimentary in its structure. And he says like, well, that song, as simple as it is, speaks to the hearts of millions. Who do you rather play for? Millions or 10 like elitist musicians in the jazz club that will go like, yeah, that was really cool. Like, who'd you rather play to? And like he says like that's the moment where I went like, oh shit, like he's right. I'm trying to be a smartass here in the room, trying to make something because it's clever and cool to like showcase my abilities. And like I think the abilities that make an artist are like multiple. So there's the craft, of course, but then there's like the what I call the emotional intelligence. It's like to read the room, ask the right questions, and like go like, who is this piece for? You know, is this like an art installation in MoMA, or is this going to be projected on a giant screen to millions of people every day with all backgrounds, all different social scales and everything? Like, I have to make something that speaks to all of them, instead of like trying to be like, I'm going to make the coolest piece ever I ever done. You know, I mean, that's how I perceive it.
I agree with you fully, and I'm gonna get a little edgy here with this because I think this applies to the state of motion graphics everywhere, but I think heavily in the states right now. And I saw it at Camograph. I see this happen a lot, and it's something you just said that really struck me is, you know, a lot of artists, motion graphics artists, and I'm gonna let me set this up first. Let's talk about motion graphics artists in the playground of working commercially for clients or studios. Like fine art is self-expression, even if it's the same tools. That's its own thing over there. Let's put that to the side for a second. But I think that's one of the biggest problems in MoGraph right now is that artists create work for themselves, not for the clients or the studios that they want to work with, and ultimately I think struggle to find work out there because it's not hearing or reflecting the state of what's needed really. I mean, ultimately, and that's I'm oversimplifying this massively because I think the layer before that that we all need to ask as creators is like, who do we want to be creating work for if we're a commercial artist? And then in that case, it's like, how do I create work that's in the sandbox of what they want to do, but brings either or both an excellence craft wise or a twist that just gives it a fresh new flavor on what they're doing. Like I ran into this at a school recruiting thing I did last year that it broke my heart. But it was all these young artists looking for jobs, and they kept for some reason they were assigned a project to do uh, stop motion, sort of After Effects kind of stop motiony title sequences as part of their senior thesis. Now that's all fine and good, but film titles, thanks to the skip intro button, are a dying breed, and stop motion, even in After Effects, isn't something I've seen in like 15 years. So to your point, someone somewhere wasn't reading the room and painting and creating a landscape and or creating a direction or creating a realization of work that needs to be created for the context of right here right now. And I think it's a humongous problem, and it makes, and then you add the layer that the other layer to it that everybody needs to be good at everything, which I think is complete fucking bullshit. Like it's you don't have to do one single thing, but like pick a lane, pick an audience, and then master that world. And I think that's where the success lies because it's considering the audience, I think, in a much more specific way. Because ultimately, look, people and you, me, clients, everybody's selfish. They want what helps them. So, and our job, I think, as commercial artists, is to make the most excellent, inspiring work, but also to help people with that work get to where they want to get to. So I don't know, but you kind of sparked something in me there that I
Yeah,
felt wow.
yeah, you know, it's like it's this sort of like weird crossroad where a lot of stuff that sometimes are like worlds apart have to connect.
Yeah,
It's like you need to be listening to what the market needs. You need to also be listening to yourself because just just doing like a robot what the market needs will lead you to burnout and depression. So
Yeah.
you also be doing something that like where you have fun, like where you know, and then you also need to be um you need to evolve. Like you cannot be doing the same thing for like 20 years.
That's
Um
we see that happen over and over, and it's you're right. It's almost like like a symphony. Like you have to have all these things playing at the same time and constantly be paying attention to them. You have to be the musician and the maestro, and you have to change it as the situation changes. And that's the key, because there's so many studios that are or were phenomenal that just didn't adapt. But the reality is everything changes constantly.
yeah.
And so and I think that's where being forever curious really actively comes into play. But it's hard. It's hard to be all in on this all the time, especially, for someone like you and I that are, a little bit older. It's just like, man, you life happens, you run out of energy, any number of different things. So it's not an easy game in that sense.
No. And I think it's going to be even harder in the next years,
Yeah.
um, for many reasons. Um, and like tying back to this concept of excellence, there's already the pressure that the market puts on you, that people put on you, the client, family, life itself, and then there's the pressure you put yourself on yourself. Um, and now I'm leaning more into more of like the bad and the ugly of this topic.
Yeah.
Um, because you mentioned, like your business partner and all the workflows you've like established and everything, the 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 realization of like digging deep into the process, and all of that is great and sounds amazing. And but there's like nobody tells you what the cost of that is, what the implications of going into that rabbit hole are.
Yeah.
So if you could share some of
Oh yeah,
those.
I got lots there. I
I have a
mean,
lot, man.
I'll tell you. Okay, so it oh, where do we even begin on this? Uh, I so let me back up with something that we've learned that has been very successful for us, but also very taxing, emotionally, physically, whatever. Is we stop waiting to be we stop waiting we stop asking for permission and waiting for people to give us permission to do something. Like, and I don't mean break the rules, like don't do whatever the client says not to do, but we started getting very proactive, whether it was our marketing, the work being asked, or anything. We just did extra and just didn't, and just kept pushing and pushing, and that did very well for us. Problem is, it had such a layer of complexity and just energy that it takes to do it, that it wore us out, and nothing kind of came to more of a pinnacle during the pandemic. There was this amazing problem in motion design that live action literally couldn't happen, so all the clients and brands needed to advertise and needed animation and monographs. So it was super duper busy for us, and not necessarily the the sexiest of work all the time, but we kept very, very busy. Now within that, you know, there's a layer that's kind of hidden stress wise, I think, in what we do, is that the more busy you are, the more complex, or the more you have to multitask, the more stressful it can become, at least for me. And I I was so infatuated with the process and getting it really dialed in and right and consistent and getting it to work at scale across this growing studio that we had going, that I broke myself quite literally. I had I basically, through stress, had they basically had to take out 2 feet of my colon. And I had to have this crazy surgery because because I didn't smoke, I didn't eat badly, I exercised, but my body just literally broke. And so I had to, and so it wrecked me, and it was just from trying to do too much, trying to take too much on, trying to, and that's the that was a dark side of it. The other dark side of it too is I think when you everybody wants to grow, right? And that's how you ultimately get trust as a studio. The bigger you are, the easier they can trust you for these bigger types of projects. But the other dark side of that is that trying to create that creative excellence at scale at a larger with a larger team is really fucking hard, because half the time you're just getting things to happen with clarity, communication wise, on time, and so forth. So I think, uh, and then again, never mind the like ebb and flow of business. Like our workflow, our job flow is never like steady throughout the year. It's like feast or famine. And so you have the business side of it, and then you have, the remote work, and it's just piles on, and it's a lot. So
what you said about like the um the effort it takes to reach that like high level percentage made me think about something that Will Smith mentioned in an interview. He said he was with Carmelo, where he's partnered with for Bad Boys, and he was saying like, yeah, we were watching the edit uh, before release with the director, and we were like, yeah, okay, this is good, this is good. Uh, and I said like, okay, we're 90% there, and the director said like, what's good at being 90% is that you know that you made only half of the way. And so, and then he goes and he says like, then that last 10%, it's not like linear, it's like it grows like this, and that last 10% is like exponential. Like it's lifetimes difference of what it demands to get to that 100%. Um, so you can be good, you know, you can be you can be really good, but if you want to be like excellent, like, and then he even jokes on it, and it's like, yeah, my son was like a chronic B student, and he was like, yeah, dad, don't worry, um, I can get A's if I want. He was like, no, you can't. Like, you don't realize, like, you might have to eat different, like, change friends, move to another city, like, the implications of, like, the ecosystem that, like, not only feeds you, but, like, pushes you upwards to get to that level is totally different. Um, and so go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think that I call it the last 5%, but the last 10%, let's just say for measurement here, I think it holds true to so many parts of this. It's the last 10% is when things get creatively excellent. It's also that last 10% when a project going perfectly can be ruined, because it's not how you start, it's how you end. So like, let's say you create something amazing creatively, you get to that last 10%, it's either not good creatively, or you deliver the project in a shitty way, or late, or not at all, and the whole relationship, the whole project is completely bombed. It's that last 10% is everything. It's where the grit comes in, it's where the like, and I think what gets really dangerous about that is that all these other factors can get in the way too. Like, you're like, oh, I we have too many projects, or we want to grow too much, or or we're overwhelmed, or all these different things. But like, it really, that last 10% is everything. I'm in full agreement with you there. Like, but it's also scary, because I think as creatives, there's a, we're like, it's the end. This is where this is showtime. Like, and I think a lot of us get even extra anxiety at that last point. So it's I think that's where the process comes in, though, right? Because if you have a plan, you're not automating it that last 10%, but what you need to do. It's not as and it's still hard. It's creativity. It's not black and white, but at least you there's a little bit of a structure.
To me, like, that last 10% is where the hardest decisions appear,
Yep.
because it's the make it or break it moment. It's it's sort of like the finishing phase. You know, like when you're in the finishing, you used to be in the finishing room with the flame, and already like paying the flame was crazy. Um, and you had all those tools that were magic, and but again, if you push them too far, you end up with something that looks like a turd. So
100%.
it's the whole like it's walking on that thin line, you know, where not too much, not too little. It's just you're kind of like in equilibrium, and you could fall either way.
One of
And
the moments I
that's a
like
lot
about
of tension.
yeah, it's a lot of tension. And one of the moments I like, but it's also the worst part of it, is you get into that like it often ends up being this last minute rush or this high anxiety moment, but the and it fucking sucks. But the one beautiful part of it is you end up going into pure intuition mode and you stop kind of overthinking it a lot of the time. And that's when if you can stay there and trust that enough, that's when that last 10% of excellence can happen is when you're in that, the fight. You're stressed out, you're worn out, you're, any number of different things, but that's when it can get really good. And that's an excellent, I think.
I will connect this to the health issue you had because you mentioned multitasking, and it has already been kind of like scientifically proven that our brains work less well when multitasking than when we are focused on one thing. And that applies to everybody. You know,
Yeah.
like I want to get out of those cliches that like men are good at a single task and women are good at like I think like life it puts us into situations that force us to adapt certain patterns. And I think like more and more society pushes to be multitasking all the time, either due to attention grabbing for social media and stuff, but also like work, the rhythmic of the work you're doing, the delivery, the timings, taking multiple projects, like running a studio, all those things. Um, and I feel that like in those like last 10%, um, to me, it has always been the delivery has always been best when instead of like having like I'm not gonna say a small team, but like instead of having a few people doing a lot of different things, which sometimes you don't have another way of doing it, it has been way better to have like maybe a couple more persons, but really focused on what they're doing. And then having a moment where everybody comes together and shares, and then we get like this kind of interaction. But then the person that is focusing on that thing is not taking care of like 10 other things that is that is like pulling him away from where his like whole intention should be.
Yeah, I agree with you and fully. And I think that that's so. I think that's the secret to all of this stuff is and because I'll add something to that I think really matters here. Because some people are. I'm actually going to bring this back to Camp MoGraph and that fireside chat because there was a few things that really bothered me about that experience that I want to illustrate with this point. The Some people are a freelancer. Some people are a small studio that can't afford more people or think that they can't afford it or whatever. The reality is the reality. It's not for me to judge. But what because the multitasking thing is a killer, and so is the overstimulation of things like social media and all this kind of a thing, right? But what can help and what has helped us a lot is when we are super structured with our tasks. So like we'll have a sales meeting, a marketing meeting, create a pitch deck time of the day, a production meeting, and it goes against the myth of creatives that we just have to feel it and we'll just know it when we see it and just go with what our intuition says when we want to do it and have it play loose. When we're really structured about it, it has helped. Hasn't fixed everything, but it has helped a lot to be able to navigate through a lot of that. And I think that's the secret ingredient because you just you'll overthink it no matter what. No one's gonna ever stop overthinking. None of us creators will, but you just do the tasks as best as you can, put that in that cubby hole and then move on to the next thing. And then it becomes a little less of this jumble of thought of what should I do, what should I not do, what should I, where do I start? I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know where to start. You complete it to the best of your ability. And we're all still going to hate it. It's not going to be great, but at least you do it and then you move on. But we're in this society with things like Slack and text messages and stuff like that that makes you constantly on, and and it sort of tries to get like, it makes everything the top of the list the most important thing. And I think that that's horrible for what we do, when we just need to be able to just do what we need to do in an order that gets it done, all these different things. Now here's where I want to come back to, because there's a whole other part of that. When I was talking about, like, when you have all these things swirling around at once, you don't know where to start, but mainly from the like confusion, mental health side of like not feeling so overwhelmed with multitasking at this, right? Now, the other layer to that, it's a different angle on it, and this is where the camograph thing drove me crazy, was that there was this picture painted that it was only one way that how studios work or don't work, which I thought was complete nonsense, because it's just not true. But my bigger point of that is that you never know how anything's going to happen, or how, and it all works differently, and I think that should be an optimistic point for artists, especially, is that like, it things work so many different ways, and so you don't have to be one way to work for another. And I think that's the same thing with studios too, big or small. Like, it's what a client needs, or an industry or a category of an industry needs, is completely different than another category or another studio or another set of artists. And I think it's just, and I mean that because I think we all as artists really get stuck in our own heads and think that things are a certain way and that we may not fit into that box. And it can be really discouraging, even for some of the most talented people out there. Like, there was artists that were in the crowd that were really demoralized by things that they heard, and I'm like, no, that's not true. You're fucking rad, and there's a place for you somewhere. And so I think just making sure we all understand that it's a much more open market than it looks like is hugely important, I think, for our both our perseverance and our optimism, because I don't think creativity or success flourishes in negativity, or a sense of that things are in a only one way or rigid way. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make there.
Yeah, like, I think um, we live in a culture of outrage,
Yeah,
sadly. And I think people, again, coming back to the reading the room, um, generally don't think that the reality of other people can be similar, different. They can be going through something very hard, and you don't know, like, you don't know what's happening on the other side of the fence, unless you
exactly.
unless you ask, unless you say, like, hey, what's going on?
Yep.
And sometimes you will get an answer, sometimes you won't, and sometimes when you don't get an answer, it's not because they're assholes, it's just because life, you know. And I'm going to tie this with the structuring part. Have you read the book Humanity from Harari?
No, but I will now.
Okay, I recommend you to read that book, because this man was tasked with the impossible quest of writing a book about humanity, and he wrote a book which is incredible. But I will only speak about this segment. So in the early beginnings of the book, he mentions that, like, uh, from studying animals in general, but like specifically monkeys, but humans too, um, they realized that as soon as a group, like, every like the congregation of humans have like a critical mass. So until 50, you don't really need a structure. People kind of like organize between themselves, like a normal leader comes up. Like, there's this kind of like synergy that exists by itself. um, as soon as you go over 50, that thing shatters and you need something else. You need structure. And he goes further and he says, like, you need myth, like the myth, like societies are built on myth, like the economy and all those things are don't exist, like physically, like if you say a tree, there's a tree, you can touch it. If you talk about like the stock exchange, that doesn't exist. That's just numbers, like digit, like doesn't it? So so structuring is necessary when you start reaching that critical mass. Because if you don't structure and put processes um, to make things work, things will shatter. Uh, and as much as you hate those processes, because yes, they make you a little bit slower, there's a decision chain, there's this and that, it helps things tie together and keeping them alive in a way. Um,
And I think that's I see that, and I think the some of the greatest out there have understood that point much earlier in their lives, and I have two very good examples of that. And there's a really renowned motion designer named G Monk it did a lot, did some stuff for Tron and does all kinds of really wonderful things. And um, we worked together earlier in my career, and one of the things that I noticed very early on, especially when we were a lot younger, was how structured and planned he was with his creativity. And it wasn't about planning and structuring the creativity itself, but he structured his time really specifically for very deliberate spaces of time to work on different things that he wanted to work on. And almost like the Pomodoro effect of giving yourself a block with limits to just do as much of that one thing as possible. And his output was incredible and always and still is. And I think in large part it's tied together to the structure of the consistency of making the time for it. Now, another group of people that when I was younger in LA, was in a circle of friends with the actor Andy Samberg and the guys from The Lonely Island, and they did these very, this was before the Saturday Night Live stuff, but they're sort of finding their way around the comedy circles here, and they did these short films that were wildly viral even before there was like social media, basically. And it was the same thing. These guys made it seem like they were just fucking around on a Saturday making these videos, but even if we were out at night going to the bars or whatever, these guys had a, a, a clipboard with a pad of paper and pen, and we're always writing and testing and structurally game planning and working on stuff back and forth. They were all in on their craft at all hours of the day, and incredibly structured and disciplined with what they did to make it to make the stuff that they made, and ultimately much more proactive. And I think that I just resonate with that point that you're making about structure, because I think it's everything to creativity, to a degree.
yeah, and like I think it's like again, this multitasking thing pulls you away from the structure. Like to
Yeah,
me, like
yeah.
the the um, the fact that you can dedicate yourself a certain amount of time. It does, it's like when I started like playing guitar, like the teacher I had said like, you rather play every day 15 to 20 minutes, but during those 15 to 20 minutes, you're like focus on that. I rather you do that than play 3 hours straight one day in the week, because you're not like your brain is not wired that way. um and it's persistence, like this routine of like doing it becomes second nature.
Well, it
And
creates confidence too. That's the other part of it, is because I think we all struggle sometimes with momentum and confidence and flow, right? That flow word, right? But like I almost call it like the reverse. I joke about this. I call it like almost like the reverse ATM fee effect of like, you go to the ATM, you take money out, it charges you $3 every single time, right? But if you do something every day, just a little bit, just a small gap, it doesn't feel like it's much, but it's like that little fee that you're putting back into creativity, but it really adds up over time a lot faster by doing it a little bit every day than that 3 hour gap a week that you might forget about the next week, or maybe it becomes a month in between. Like, and I think that that's a humongous part of this all, is to create that consistency kind of. But it's hard. It's hard because we all, especially when we're just starting out with, like, let's say you're learning, it doesn't matter, but let's say you're learning Houdini or something like that. No one likes to feel like they suck at something those first few tries or first many tries, right? That's like
But you will suck. I
you
mean,
will. That's an inevitability. You just have to do it and work
we
through
all
it.
did. We all sucked.
Yeah, and it gets harder when we get older and all these kinds of things. So I don't
Um, yeah, it's like, again, we've been working a lot about the work, um, and structure process. Um, how this has impacted you in your personal life, because this is all about like growing as an artist, like evolution, and we've touched on burnout and stuff like that, and how physically this can drain you. But we have also families, we have friends, couples, kids sometimes. um what has been the impact of this in for you personally? And you can share whatever you want, like I'm not asking you anything in particular. um and what part of this at some point humbled you?
know. Oh, all of it. Like, it's. I'll give you. I'll give you an example. This year has been crazy for me. We talked about this at the beginning. I've traveled a humongous amount, probably more than any other year in my life. I had the honor of going and speaking at a bunch of different conferences, still trying to run laundry, or at least my part of it, and then family, friends, and it exercise, health, and it's the fact of the matter is, for me, or at least from what I can tell, there is no balance. You have to, at any given time, probably pick a couple of them because there's just not enough hours in the day. There really isn't. And so, um, my personal work has completely shit the bed this year. But then I, and, but at the same time, and even family and personal life is not as strong as it has been in the past. Friends, yes, because I've traveled and been around a lot of friends. So um, it, it it's hard because a person like me that's so critical and hard on myself from my upbringing thinks that I need to be able to do and be excellent at all of the different categories, and I haven't been, and it's not possible, I don't think, or very difficult. And so I felt really spread thin and ultimately had kind of a burnout this year, pretty heavily because of it, because I was trying to be the best at everything with all the attentiveness that it all needs. So it I think in a healthy way, which I'm probably not, you have to identify what at any particular time you're going to give your attention to and sacrifice something else. But it's very difficult to do that for me, and probably a flaw of mine. So it's uh, that's what I would say, because with family and friends, let's just say, or either or, you have to put, it's a job. It's not a job like in the cold sense of it, but it requires time like anything else, and attention, and it's um so that's the biggest, that's kind of what it looks like for me and what I've seen. I think there's actually another humongous layer of this that you started off on too at the beginning. It's something I'm always, and it comes from a place of insecurity in myself, but it's always something I'm keeping a close eye on, is ego. And one of the biggest things I think that you can easily fall into a trap with is you make some cool piece, you own a studio, you get to speak at conferences, and suddenly you're like, oh, my shit doesn't stink, or it stinks a little bit less. But it's a very, very, very dangerous spot, because then you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to do what I've already done because everybody wants me to talk about it or put it on the internet. But really, just like anything else, that can fade in a year. There could be some new thing. There could be some, and it's not about the comparison game, but art, even commercially, is about evolving always. And so I think but it takes a certain amount of humility and getting outside of your own bullshit to keep up with that. And that, but it's hard to do, especially with more going on. So that's definitely what my fucked up world looks like at the moment.
Yeah, like I think when you become successful, um, it can hamper your capability to grow
Yep.
heavily because of what you're saying, because you become imbued from like your own personality, and like implicitly that shuts you off, closes your brain of being open and receptive to things that might not look as good as you would want to, but will still like touch a nerve or like go on something. I've seen pieces that like were very rudimentary, technically speaking, but for example, the narratives aspects were incredible. And I will also say that like the notion of what excellence and success is can be radically different.
Oh, that I mean, that sums this all up because I can't tell you, like, look, at this point, I I I, I make sure in my heart and in my management and in my creation to make it as good as I can possibly be, that it could possibly be. But where it goes or how it's perceived after that has to be letting go of, because I can't tell you, there's pieces that we've done that I'm like, that's the one, that's it, that's the best ever, and crickets. And then we've done stuff that I thought was very good, but I didn't give it much thought, that were wildly well received. And then you get into the whole like put art on the internet type of thing, and you very quickly realize that every person likes something different, and every group of people has different opinions on the same thing, for better or for worse, and it's impossible to nail intentionally. Like it just it's a losing battle. So it's
If there was like the magic equation to success, everybody would be using it.
yeah.
I think you can have somewhat of an equation of like how not fail badly, but like success is just it has this like Russian roulette aspect to it. And I would say like when I was saying notion like the notion of what excellence and success is radically different, is like for somebody it can be like you said, like having a cool piece and talking into these conferences. For somebody else, it could be having the best family life ever and just making enough money to, like just riff on it. Um, I'm gonna like bounce on so much and what you said about like the personal life aspect, um, and the multiple jobs. Um, I know on my end that like earlier on my career, I was like going all in the work, and I was clearly getting out of touch with the family side of things. And I was becoming like absent. And so the way of like, I'm not gonna say solve that problem because it's not 100% solution. It's not a silver bullet, but a way to tackle that was again to structure.
Yeah.
And it was to like decide that I would start working at this time of the day, and then at this time of the day, I'll take a break, and I take that time to spend time with my wife and eat, chat. Like normal, nothing crazy. It's not like going to a restaurant. It's like no, it's just sitting together and having a conversation. um, then going back to work, and then at a certain moment again, like stop, take time to have dinner, play with my kid, stuff like that. Like, and then if I had to, then work more later on. but it was allocating those chunks to those things no matter what.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, again, that helped me, but I mean, doesn't mean it will work for everybody. Uh, but I know that if I hadn't done that, I would be in a very, very bad place now.
Yeah.
Um, so, um, yeah, I don't know if you still have a little bit of time or if you want to start
I have let me
landing the plane.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have some time. Yeah. Yeah, 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 let's do it.
Okay. Um, Now, you know, you mentioned these events, um, which I have kind of like a mitigated feeling about those events. So on one end, I see the benefit of it, like the collectivity, like getting together, you meet new people. That part, I love it. Then the part that I like less, but it's hard to, again, I don't have the solution for that, is that generally those generate this kind of like elitist circle.
Yep.
Um, and it creates this like cleavage between the people that are in the conference and the people that are giving the conference. And I've seen some of those conferences when they started, and they were like more like Ken Mograph, let's say, where you know the people that is talking is after like doing kayak with you, and so everybody's is a horizontal structure, and the time spent into those talks is very little compared to the rest of the time you spend together doing all the things, connecting differently. But then I saw those things become more popular and yeah, become these kind of like elitist circles where the people talking are not even anymore afterwards in the same places as the people at the conference. They are in these VIP circles, drinking between each other. It becomes like this private club. And that part I hate it. Like I hate it because I'm against elitism in whatever form or shape. But I've never been, I've never given like such conferences. So I was curious what was your point of view about those things?
Yeah, good question. So when you set up this picture of the separation and sort of the elitism at the start, I felt that before really attending too many of these conferences pretty severely, and it made me feel like shit. And what I learned from this past few years is it's it really depends on the conference. Let me just say, but like I will say, I took a swipe at Camograph earlier, but what I love about Camograph is that it exactly as you described it basically gets everybody together for 2 or 3 days straight. It breaks down all those barriers, and it's truly wonderful. And I think the other part that I'll say, and I know I'm sugarcoating this on the front end, but one of the biggest strengths I've found with conferences is, yeah, you see some really inspiring work. It lands differently when you see it in person, even though a lot of the time you can just go to said studio or artist website. But to hear the stories of the struggles and how you got there is, even though you don't necessarily get a solution from it, some magic button, to hear someone else going through it is incredibly therapeutic. To be like, shit, it's not just me. Now, as far as that dynamic between speakers and attendees, a few different things I've learned happen. A lot of the time, it depends on the setup of the conference itself. So, in certain cases, they'll they'll have a hotel where the speakers are at, and it's not near the venue, and so the speakers over there, so they don't interact as much with the attendees in the same way. The other part of it, this is just me, but with the travel and schedules, half the time I'm just so jet lagged that I like come do the talk, maybe watch one or two, and then crash out, or I have work projects that I just need to jump back and get into that keeps me sort of out of the crowds a little bit. And I wish I actually, in my last conference, I was really mad at myself because all of those things happened and I didn't get to interact and meet a bunch of really lovely people. The third part of it is, I don't think I've only met a very few select speakers that and I won't name names that are like that have sort of that elitism and arrogance that we're describing here. Like, I mean, but like 2%, like not most of the time, the speakers, even the best ones you can think of, are nervous. Like I was at a conference where I met one of my heroes, and the person was on their laptop rearranging slides 15 minutes before their talk. And this is a person that's done probably 200 talks. And it was very humbling to me to be like, oh, everybody still goes through those nervous butterflies of this. And the person was a bit isolated from everybody else, even other speakers getting ready for this. And it was very surprising and revealing. Um, so I think there's a lot of, and then a humongous amount is just how the particular conference is set up. Like that's like I was at one where like even the way that they had it organized and the way that the hotel wasn't near the conference. Somehow the way it was set up, just even the hotel configuration, I didn't even see any of the other speakers. I had one speaker that was a friend of mine that I hung out with, but I didn't actually meet anybody else. So it was just set up in a unusual way. So there's my point is there's just a lot of variables.
Yeah, no, I want to specify that when I mentioned that feeling of elitism, I didn't meant to say that the speakers were elitist themselves, not at all, because they're just artists. And as in life in general, some people are nice and others are bad, and that's the way it is. No, I was meaning more about, I was more talking about the organization of those conferences,
Oh,
which I don't know for whatever reason they structure things in that way. Meaning, again, I don't know if it's like, you know how like sometimes like agencies think try to think as the client would think and they get it completely wrong.
yeah,
This is kind of like the same feeling. It's like they think that, oh no, these people, they are like the top of the top, so they should stay together, and they have all these structural ideas that to me go completely against the fact of like gathering together, talking about the shit that makes us like resonate, and get to like then come down the stairs, have a beer, and just have a rando like nerd out with you, and about passion, and just realizing like, okay, I'm not alone here, like I'm not the only one like nerding with these things.
one thing I've learned too that I did not know until very recently, and also really humbled me about about a lot of conferences is if so. I think ultimately the people that run, you ignore the like Adobe Maxes of the world that are these huge conglomerations and that kind of thing, right? But like the design conferences generally, uh, it's usually a person or a group of people that are extremely passionate about, in our case, design, motion design, whatever. And they have a day job, they're doing it above and beyond. And they're taking a gigantic risk, but also like they're nervous. They're super fans. They want to impress their city, but also create something that's as cool or cooler or more well put together for the speakers that they invite. And what the point I'm trying to make is that I think there's a pressure on them to put on the most professional level conference that they can, and that means like the green room or the da 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 da, trying to match and one up whatever version of the most elite or prestigious conference is. And so I think from what I can tell, it creates those little moments of like the separate room for the speakers with the bar or these little things that can make it feel elitist that I don't think are meant to do it on purpose, but to just sort of unfold that way. Um, but the part that really kind of humbles me about that is that, you know, even ones that you don't think are take a humongous amount of investment, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. And if you break even, you've succeeded. And I did not know that. I thought these conferences made millions of dollars and got in their Lamborghinis and drove off, and it was not the case at all. So I guess my point to that is I think it in almost every case I've ever seen, it comes from a place of humility to try to like be as professionally put together as possible for these conferences, but it creates these sometimes these separations. And I don't think on purpose. I think it's just trying to not seem poorly put together.
Yeah, yeah. Like hide the chaos, like because
Yeah,
I
because event planning is one of the most chaotic things in the universe. Like
yeah, yeah. I,
it's
I I was gonna say like I haven't organized like events, but I've been close enough to or I worked for companies that like organized events, and it's always chaos.
oh
And
yeah.
it's no matter the scale of the company. I don't know why, and I think it's probably due to the fact like, oh, the guy from the catering canceled, and oh, like all the what if, well, all the what ifs happen,
It's like
and
planning a wedding.
yeah, exactly,
So
exactly, and so it's just madness.
yeah,
Um, but thank you for clarifying that
I've
because
seen that. I've been at conferences where a particular speaker for either responsible reasons or irresponsible reasons just cancels 2 hours before they're supposed to do their talk, and you're like, can you imagine the stress that put on the organizers? Like,
yeah, but I mean, but thank you for giving me your point of view because I think what you mentioned is important, and I hadn't seen it that way. The fact that they are trying to be or look professional and well put together, and that in fact those separations happen despite all the good intentions.
yeah,
Um, and so that thank you for that because I hadn't seen it that way. Um, I've already used and abused a little bit of your time, so I would like to kind of like start wrapping up
yeah,
um, about this. And in a recent call of the Monday meeting, um, I we were talking about like people starting up and stuff like that, and I mentioned that as we grow, our vision of the work we do, our goals evolve constantly. So when you start your career, when I started, I thought I was going to work at Pixar, and then I didn't work at Pixar, but I worked on something not as big, but like from kind of like the same size as Pixar, and I realized it wasn't meant for me. Like I didn't felt that I could fit in there, and then that evolved, and so tying back to the main topic, which was that quest for excellence, how that quest has evolved for you. So it started in a certain way that you already shared. Where is it today? Like, what is your quest now?
oh, that's a good
Despite
question.
not only it's not only the work, like I know you want to do cool stuff and keep like you said that, like, but I want to go further that.
Yeah, it so the work's only a base layer of it. It's about people for me right now. It's about connection with people. That's my purpose, true and true right now. So to your point, I worked at a my first job out of school was, and I thought it was the job that I needed to get and should get. I worked with under a partner at and now at Pentagram, and on paper it looked like the most amazing opportunity to ever get. Certainly as a first job, I failed miserably. I wasn't a fit in any way. It wasn't a personality fit. I was trying to be a type of designer that I just wasn't, so on and so forth. Um, Over the years, got into After Effects film titles, advertising, all this shit, and it's all gone great. Knock on wood, we're still here. But where I've gotten to now is that even in the best of cases, with the best of intentions and the best pursuit of excellence, it is so much harder when you're not working in energies you feel safe and comfortable in, and that usually comes down to people. And so my journey and my vision and my goal right now is, yes, to work on some of the biggest brands and coolest projects in the world. Of course, like that hasn't changed what those mean totally evolved, but it comes down to connection with teams and people, because ultimately if you can't create a synergy there, it doesn't matter how good the project's going to be. It's going to be very difficult, if not a failure, if there's not a connection there. Now, that is a very almost elitist, or at least first world or problem or solution or whatever. It's a very I sit in a very comfortable seat to be able to make that choice, and I know it because we're big enough now that we have our ups and downs, but we get enough work and a steady stream of work and have a reputation for that. But 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 that is ultimately the decider for me now, is just making sure that there's a collaborative connection, because that's all there is left for me now, I think, after this point. um and that goes both ways. That's with clients, that's with artists, that's with at every level, every direction.
Yeah, I think that I don't want to sound like an old pirate, but like as you grow older, your priorities kind of like shift,
Yeah,
and you start like seeing like things differently. I used to react very strongly to certain stuff when I was younger, and nowadays it's like I'm like, okay, like, and then I see younger people getting mad at it, and I'm like, don't get mad at it. It's like there's nothing you can do about it. Like, just don't put your energy into that, and we start like putting those buckets become other buckets where we put our efforts and our energy. Um, but I think it's a nice way to close this. Of in the end, like there was a time where a one man army could land these jobs because the sector was very new, and tools were very rudimentary. But nowadays, if you want to be working at a certain level, that's not a one person effort. And in the end, it's all about the people you surround yourself with, the energy that that group has, and truly, I think, caring about the people. Um, because I think that, like, that there are these two visions. One says like everybody is disposable, like everybody should be able everybody you should be able to replace everybody. And I can see that from like a purely technical aspect of like a factory. But when you're talking like a group of creatives, what makes this group thrive, it's a different quantity of ingredients that by the pure hazard of life made the perfect balance, and that group jives extremely well together.
I agree fully with that. I don't think I can see how, if you look purely at the art, and I don't even fully agree with this, but if you look at the art, I can see how someone might think it's disposable, but it really comes down to the synergy in the end, and I think that rules everything. But I think it's a lot easier to create synergy than we all think. I think you just have to trust people and be open minded, and find those groupings as best as you can. And so the fact that, and not to bounce back to it, but that's what I really take from like the conferences too, is it warms you up to the humanity of people and fellow artists, and takes them out of just being this little profile picture on Instagram or LinkedIn and just another thing you scroll by. And I think that's hugely important to all of what we do.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it's the frame you put around it. Like create a space to allow those things to happen.
Yeah.
Um, before being a freelance, I worked in different studios, and some of them were really bad at like creating the proper frame to allow these things to flourish. Some of them were even like against these things to flourish because it was this sort of like divide and conquer mentality, this notion of like having a control of your team, when, I mean, this is not a group of accountants. It's like this is people that art comes from places inside of us that comes from like trauma, like happiness, all these emotions, and like I directed a piece from for the Red Cross, and a whole segment of it is directly inspired from stuff that I went through. Uh, so it was very personal. Um, so you need to create like a place where those things can get out without the fear of being rejected or canceled or whatever you call it. Um, and from the work you've been doing at the laundry, I think that's kind of like the space you've been building, at least now.
It's the hope. I definitely am turning a page to try to be more vulnerable and just sort of emotionally honest, and of course always doing phenomenal work as best as we can. So yeah.
Okay, PJ. I think we've passed like the 1 hour 30
Yeah,
recording.
yeah, we
So
went obviously we went the distance. So, but thank you.
so thanks for taking the time to record this call with me. Um, it's always a pleasure to see you, man.
You as well. You as well, and I hope to see you at camp or another place sometime soon.